and Neva. Jim and Neva have worked for over 40 years in doing lifestyle seminars. And they've written 3 cookbooks. And I'm not going to say any more because you all got a pretty good description of Jim's background. So if he wants to share more, that's up to him. Thank you for coming. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Most people have no idea how much effort he and his wife put together to make Arizona Sunshine happen. And he was sharing some of that with me. I'm probably going to step on your toes here this evening. Have you ever noticed that Americans are somewhat uninformed about health and nutrition? Have you ever noticed that? And sometimes misinformed. Have you ever noticed that? All you have to do is get online and listen to 2 different experts, and what do they tell you? 2 different things. Now, of course, tonight you're going to get the truth. You understand that, don't you? But just to help you a little bit more of my background, so it may be some credibility. Now, my wife says people believe me because I sound like I know what I'm talking about. And actually, that's often the case. People can make themselves sound like they know what they're talking about, and it's easy to believe them, isn't it? But just a little background. Actually, my first graduate degree was in nuclear physics. I was a physics and electronics and math teacher for a number of years. But I went back to graduate school and got a degree in public health nutrition. And it happened that in that cohort, almost everybody that was in that were working full time. And so we would have these intensives over a period of about 3 years. There was about 25 physicians in that group, along with several of others of us. I'm not a physician, I'm a scientist. But I had the privilege of working with those men and women for many years, really all over the world. And so I do bring to you expertise from a wide field of very well-trained professionals. And I hope that will help you when I step on your feet about what some of your opinions are. I knew you'd be disappointed if I didn't show you my favorite picture of our girls. The one on the left is 52, the one on the right is 50, so that was a while back. An American epidemic, and notice the silent killer. It's possible to have diabetes for years and not know it. The problem is that once the average blood sugar, and I'll explain more about that in a moment, is above normal, every tissue in the body is slowly being destroyed. That is always the case. And so it's a silent killer. And notice that this was published clear back in 20. You probably can't read that. But this is an epidemic of incredible proportions. Today, 1 person in 11, this has changed from 12, 1 person in 12 just not that long ago. But by 2050, 1 person out of every 4 will have diabetes. And that comes from an international consortium of scientific groups that have studied this, and this is their position. Now, most of you in here don't have diabetes. If it's 1 out of every 11, maybe there's 2 or 3 of you. Maybe there's more than that because of the topic this evening. But as you may know, and as I'll be showing you, there are issues on the way to diabetes. 75% of Americans are currently on their way to getting diabetes. And during that time, dementia, the development of dementia is a very significant issue, and I will show you the details on that shortly. But just in case for those of you that don't have diabetes or don't even have a family member, I think you'll find this fascinating and interesting. Now here's my dear friend John McDougall. He's probably the senior member of a group of maybe 30 physicians who have made themselves scientists by training or by study, who are experts in this question of how lifestyle affects all kinds of diseases for Americans. And this is what he said about type 2 diabetes. I'll mention all of them in a moment. 100% of what? is preventable. That's a very amazing statement. He is speaking with authority, believe me. One of the most well-informed, but like I said, there's a pretty good group of physicians and scientists who are in this category in terms of lifestyle. Here's the amazing thing, friends. 100% of type 2 diabetes is reversible. Very good news. And my wife and I have been working in this field for almost 50 years. She has put up with me for almost 57 years. And we've spent a lot of our time all over the world helping people become informed. I don't know if you probably wouldn't know this, but the country, anybody know the country, aside from my wife, of course, in the world that has the distinction of having the highest incidence of diabetes of any place in the world? Anybody know by any chance? Actually not. It's actually the country of St. Lucia. And my wife and I have been invited to the Caribbean 21 times to hold reversing diabetes programs. And about at least 80% of those times we were on the island of St. Lucia, where the incidence is so high. Now, in the Caribbean, where we have, in the Western Pacific, where we have also worked on the islands, it's similar. All of the Caribbean islands are extremely high with diabetes. It's because of their lifestyle. But it just happens that St. Lucia, and somebody has to go there and take care of these things, right? So we've had our blessing. Now, I want to show you something about circulation here, a little background, because circulation is the huge issue with diabetes. Now, my physician friend who commissioned this painting to be made did it before. There was one thing about it that's not accurate, but otherwise it is. I think all of you are very familiar with the fact that in the top of your heart there leaves this very large, we call it the aorta, artery, which immediately branches up and down and branches, and every branch branches, and every branch branches, until finally the artery, and these arteries, you know this, are all over your body, every organ, everywhere. The branch finally gets so tiny you cannot see it with the naked eye. So they give it a different name. Instead of an artery, they call it an arteriole. It's an artery. It's a muscular structure that can stretch and compress, but it's very, very tiny. And then it suddenly bursts into 10, 20, 30, sometimes 40 little tiny pipes. I'm sure you're aware that these things are called capillaries. And of interest is the fact that every capillary has a muscle that can either close it or let it be open. And in actuality, of a bundle of 20, 30, 40 of these, there is always one that does not have a muscle. Can you see that? So that the circulation all over your body is under constant control. There is a wire from the brain to every one of those muscles. You're all with me when I say wire. What I'm talking about is a nerve, of course. And the body controls then how much blood is wherever it's needed. There is not enough blood to fill all the capillaries. And so these muscles, these little tiny sphincters, control. And when you're out running, guess where the body sends a lot of blood? To the muscles in the legs and the breathing, and of course the heart too. So the whole thing is under control. Now, the one error in this picture, which was not known when it was painted, it is correct that the red blood cells have to push their way through, but what was not known when this was painted is that the red blood cells actually fold themselves in half in order to push their way through. Otherwise, it's a very correct representation. And there are various kinds of problems that cause the circulation to be poor. And when I say circulation, I'm essentially talking about this part, because this is where all the nutrients that get to your cells, the oxygen, the removal of carbon dioxide, all happens in these little tiny capillaries. And every single cell in your body is no farther away than one cell's width from a capillary. They're everywhere. You can take a pin, you know this. It doesn't matter where you poke, you get a drop of blood, right? Because you just broke about 20 or 30 capillaries. And this is an amazing system. But let me show you a picture now, an actual micro photograph. This is probably magnified about 11 million times. And I'll just do it with the laser pointer. And all of you can look to the left when I do this. This is like a capillary here that's coming out of the screen and is chopped off. We have a word for that. We say it's a cross-section. Maybe you're familiar with that term. And the idea here is that there is a basement membrane that forms the capillary, if you will, and lining the membrane are cells. And if you look up to your left and up just a little bit, you can see where one cell is connecting to the next. Can you all see that right there? Talk to me, please. Yes. Okay. And then you can see where it connects over here and so forth. And then there's another, that is the cell I pointed to a moment ago. And this area marked L, stands for a word I won't even mention, is where the red blood cells have to squeeze through. Now, when the blood sugar is elevated, and it's really an important idea to understand that we are talking about the average blood sugar, not a spike or a drop or something, but the average blood sugar, when it is elevated, causes that basement membrane to thicken. Are you with me on what I'm trying to describe? What does that do to the space where the red blood cells have to pass? It restricts it, it diminishes it. This is the cause of virtually every side effect of diabetes, poor circulation. Now, there's a lot of other things that Americans do to make their circulation poor, which I'll look at some of the main ones with you. But this is an amazing story. The incredible thing is that you can get well so quickly, albeit that's going to be our theme here this evening, and I'll show you a lot more about that momentarily. Now, a man by the name of Roy Swank, I just love this guy. What he did for the world is almost without, you can hardly describe what it means. Very few people know about him. He passed away recently. But he is distinguished in his field for what he found could, listen to this, friends, this is not my topic tonight. Roy Swank is a neurologist who saw over 10,000 patients with multiple sclerosis. And in virtually every case, if they would follow what he taught them, they could stop the progression of their multiple sclerosis. You get his book, you just Google Roy Swank, it'll come right up. Fascinating story. And this is what he studied and learned. He gave, in this case, he used hamsters, and he would shave their little furry cheek. I know this sounds mean. Put a tube into their stomach so he could put in there what he wanted for food. And he put a light bulb in their mouth. He anesthetized them. And then he put a microscope here to this pouch, this stretched out pouch, and he could actually see the capillaries. I actually have the videos that he made of how the red blood cells are moving rapidly through the capillaries. And then he puts in their stomach a high-fat meal. And you can just watch in real time the effect on the red blood cells and how they slow and almost stop in their circulation. And he, of course, saw that this was the case in human beings as well. But a heavy fat diet caused changes in the circulation. After a typical high-fat American meal, red blood cells become sticky and bind to one another. I'm going to illustrate that with a drawing in a moment. About 3 hours after the meal, they would aggregate together and form clumps. It took a little while for the digestion and the movement of the nutrients into the bloodstream for this to happen. By the way, I am very comfortable with questions. If something isn't clear, I would appreciate it if you just raise your hand. If I point to you and keep talking, it means I wanted to finish my sentence, and then I'll come back to you. How many of you agree to raise a question if you need to? Let me see your hands. Okay, now don't lie to me now. Okay. I'm an old classroom teacher, folks, for years and years, and I'm very comfortable with whatever is needed. These clumps are large enough and tough enough so they can obstruct circulation. Where? In the capillaries. So here's the diagram. Normally your red blood cells and mine are electrically charged. You all know about this. You comb your hair with the brush and the hair sticks to the brush. Because the brush is charged negatively, you might not know that, and the hair is charged positively. And so what do opposite charges do? They attract. What do similar charges do? You know they repel. If you didn't know that, please understand that. If I took two objects up here, let's say two little lightweight balls on a string, and I got them electrically charged opposite, they would push apart from each other. That's the idea. However, when there is fatty particles in the blood after a high-fat meal, that electrical charge disappears and the red blood cells clump together. This effect has been known for many years. Roy Swank studied it in detail, and it actually has a name. It's not important, the so-called effect of this. But you add this along with other factors that I'm going to be showing you, and the average American, 75% folks of Americans, have this going on in their bloodstream many, many hours of the day. So it's a big issue that most Americans are quite uninformed about. Now let's talk quickly about the types of diabetes. Type 1, 2, 3. We actually didn't have type 3 until recently. Type 1 diabetes is fairly rare. I'll describe briefly some of these. Type 2 diabetes. Of the diabetes that exists in this country, 95% of it is what we call type 2. Then there's gestational diabetes, diabetes insipidus, and now type 3 diabetes, which actually is just another name for Alzheimer's disease. Are y'all with me on this? This is amazing, friends. The #1 risk factor for diabetes is, guess what? I'm sorry, I meant to say Alzheimer's disease is what? Diabetes, which is the poor circulation, of course, is what is going on there. This is astonishing, friends, because 75% of Americans are in a condition on their way to type 3 diabetes, or if you will, Alzheimer's disease. We all know about this, don't you? No, there isn't one of us in this room that isn't, shall I say, somewhat fearful about being one of those people that suffers from dementia. Frankly, I'm getting forgetful these days. Anybody else know about that? And frankly, it worries me. Even though my wife and I have been living, we have been living like we teach for 50 years. This is not something we're just telling people we think they ought to do. What are the complications from diabetes? Well, poor circulation, heart disease. For 20 years now, physicians have been told by their professional organizations that if somebody comes into their office and they diagnose diabetes, let's say for the first time, they are to understand, they are to assume, they are to know that that person already has coronary artery disease. There is no exception to that. It's just incredible what's happening to Americans without their knowledge. Stroke, blindness. #1 cause of blindness in adults, type 2 diabetes. Amputations. We amputate in America 253 legs every day because of diabetes. Now follow me carefully, friends. Every one of those legs could have been saved. I'll tell you a quick story, and it'll be obvious to you. It almost always starts with a little bit of a wound, usually on the foot or maybe partway up the leg, a little scratch, a little cut. And the wound does not heal. Why? Poor circulation. One of my former students became a nurse, and she and my wife and I have been friends through the years. This woman has spent most of her life trying to help people whose sores will not heal because of their diabetes. You know, they're in the hospital and they're trying to get that sore to heal. Well, in one of our trips to St. Lucia, we actually, the first time we were there, we had been to some of the other islands, but the first time we were at St. Lucia, I got to be careful about this because I like to tell stories and I don't want to take too much time, but there was a Catholic priest there that came to the class, and if you talk to him today, his name is Harcourt Brackett. If you walked up to him today and said, "Do you guys know? Do you know the Bracketts?" He'd say, "Yes, they saved my life." He was at death's door, but he came to the class, and because he's a priest, he has. It turns out to be a lady who is the chef for the parsonage, or what do they call it when it's not a? The rectory. Thank you. And he just handed her our cookbook and said, "You only use this from now on." And he got well. He got well in 1 week. And he put everybody, in fact, I was talking to the dean of the medical school. There's 2 medical schools on the island of Barbados. And I was talking to in fact, that first class was at Barbados, and he had come over there. Thank you, dear. I was talking to the dean of one of the medical schools, and he was telling me about Harcourt. And how he said, "You know, we nearly lost him 2 weeks ago from his diabetes." So Harcourt handed the cookbook to his cook, and she followed it, and he got well. And I think, dear, it was before we left the island, or did he send that to us after we got home? A 2-page color. The newspaper is normally not in color. 2-page spread of him describing his situation and how he had come to our class and gotten well. Oh, and what the dean of the medical school told me, besides saying we nearly lost him, it wasn't the dean, it was our host that had invited us there, said, he came up to me and he said, "I want you to meet a Catholic priest, and everybody on the island knows him." And it turns out he had a radio program, and everybody on the island knows him, everybody in the whole nation. In any case, so now we're at St. Lucia. Harcourt, as a priest, had connections with the Catholic Retreat Center in St. Lucia, one of the other islands. And we were there setting up, and the ladies that had a weekend for the ladies, and they were packing up, and we would bump into each other and chat or whatever. And one of the gals bumped into Jim McCann. Jim and I, he's a physician. We have worked together for many, many years. And he and his wife were with Neva and me. I think you heard Neva's name. In case you didn't, that's who I'm referring to every time I say Neva. Jim bumped into one of the ladies, so to speak, and she said, "So what are you guys doing?" And he told her, "We're here to do a reversing diabetes program." And she said, "Well, my husband's having his foot amputated in the morning, Monday morning." And he asked her a few questions, and he said, "I think we can save your husband's foot, his leg. Why don't you come tonight with him to the opening class?" And she came with him, and he had this terrible wound on, his foot, kind of on the inside area there. Of course, it's not something you take lightly. Jim watched him carefully. You understand what I'm talking about? And Jim came to me on Thursday morning, and he said, "The wound is healing." And there's a radio program on the island of St. Lucia. I got to quit this storytelling. The name of the program is That Makes Me Mad. And the guy that's the host is just one of the coolest characters I have ever met. And you can imagine a program like that. Whatever's going wrong with the government or whatever else, then he's going to deal with that. That makes me mad. A tremendous host, and I think our very first trip there, I can't recall just how we got on his program, but in the 20 or 18 times we've been back to that island, every time he hears we're there, he calls up. He says, "Jim, come up. Let's do an hour together." So when we were there, just at the beginning of COVID, we were over there on the way back. From there was the first time we saw 2 or 3 people get on the plane with masks. It was, I don't know, in early March or something. And anyway, this fellow, I'm sorry I can't say the host's name. Sometimes I can come up with it. But anyway, the host heard about this guy whose leg was saved, and he was just into that all for. And he was talking about it on the radio program frequently, and whenever we'd be back in the island, we'd talk about that story. And this guy was driving his truck, his taxi truck, all over the island for 10 years. And then he, guess what? We say he fell off the wagon and started eating like... Do you know that St. Lucians, they had no history of diabetes? Do you know why? Because they raised all their own food in their gardens for centuries. And when they started eating like Americans, you know that people of color are at higher risk for diabetes. You're probably aware of that. And most of the population, there's a lot of white people on the islands too, but most of the population, their ancestry is from Africa. So they have a high risk. So after 10 years, what a heartbreak. This guy went back to his old ways. His diabetes, if you will, came back. He had a leg amputated and died. And I didn't know that. And here I'm on the program, and this host, you know, we're always talking. In this particular case, we had been invited to have an audience with the Governor General. Now, you probably don't know, I wouldn't have known, most of the islands are under the Crown. And the Queen of England elects the Governor General. And technically, she or he is the #1 boss. The people on the island elect a prime minister who administers the government, but technically speaking, the Queen, in this case, she was a female when we were there, invited to meet with her, if she wants to lay down the law, she can lay down the law no matter what. In any case, she had sent her chef to one of our programs, and when we went to visit her, we had to call, of course, immediately she said, "Stop that stuff." I said, I think we called her Your Highness or something, and she said, "Come on." But anyway, she had given one of our cookbooks to her chef, clear back when let's just say we held a class. I was going to tell you that we held the class by invitation in the Prime Minister's residence for 6 days, and they invited, this is her words, not mine. The Chief of Staff said, "If you guys will come back and do one here, I'll invite all the ministers' wives," not pastor ministers, but ministers of affairs, right? And so here were all these, and she said to me, "And they're all fat." That's her words, those were not mine. So anyway, we went to see the Governor General. Nice gal, really lovely lady. And I said to her, because she was using our book too, she had told her chef, who had come to our class, "This is what you're to use from now on." And I said to her, "You know," I don't know if I called her Your Highness again, but I said, "You know what would help, you know what would make your people well on this island. And I'd like to encourage you to really make a campaign to get them to try to follow what their queen is doing." I'm sorry, the Governor General is what her term actually is. 253 legs a day, friends. They all could have been saved. Is that a big deal or not? Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Kidney failure. #1 cause of kidney failure, diabetes. Premature death. Peripheral neuropathy. Neuro, nerve. Pathy means disease. And what happens is, because of poor circulations, the nerve cells do not die, but they are no longer healthy enough to send a signal. And it's called peripheral because it usually starts in the periphery. Sometimes the hands, most commonly people with diabetes start seeing peripheral neuropathy in their feet. A little tingling, gets worse and worse, and 253 legs a day, that just blows my mind. All could have been saved. Gastroparesis is neuropathy of the nerves that make the stomach go like this and like this. So stomach emptying is compromised. Would that make sense? Gastroparesis. Infections, of course, because of poor circulation, they don't heal. Cataracts. Gangrene was usually, as you know, the thing that finally said, the doctor says, "We've got to take that leg off or it'll kill you." Gangrene forming because of the wound. High blood pressure, larger babies, premature birth with all of its problems, ulcers. Actually, the list, folks, goes on and on because of complications from diabetes. for many years, way back in the history, the diagnosis for diabetes was a fasting blood sugar of 140 or more. About 30 years ago, that was changed to 125, and suddenly, overnight, a few million more people had diabetes. Why? Because they moved the threshold, see? And this was the first time that something called prediabetes was, if you will, defined. I have one physician friend, a very famous fellow, who said, and when this, if I took the time to tell you about him, which I'm going to make myself not do, you'd understand. He was at the forefront saying, prediabetes is diabetes. Quit kidding yourself. Are you all with me on this idea? And he's correct. The problems that come from diabetes are there even when someone has prediabetes. The current diagnosis, how many of you have ever heard of something called hemoglobin A1C? Can I see your hands? Well, a half of you. It's a type of hemoglobin. If I get a chance, I'll probably run out of time. I'll explain kind of more about it. But it's a type of hemoglobin that is fairly easy measured that gives you the average blood sugar for the last 3 months. And so we no longer do glucose tolerance tests. I talked to an endocrinologist, not recently, but a couple of years ago. He said, I haven't done a glucose tolerance test for 15 years because this method is just the rock solid way to know where people are with diabetes. Am I clear? You are clear on what I'm trying to describe. So measuring hemoglobin A1C gives the physician a picture of what's been happening for 3 months, as well as just what might have been happening more recently. But pre-diabetes, there's a range of numbers. I'll try to get to this if I get a chance before we go this evening. But if the A1C is at 6.5 or higher, then we say the person has, that means the average blood sugar is elevated to a certain point. Am I making myself clear enough? That we can say, okay, you have diabetes, and it actually measures the average blood sugar, as I said, for the past 3 months. Quickly, type 1 diabetes used to be called childhood onset because mostly it was children that got it. Today we're finding adults getting type 1 diabetes. I'll come back to it in a few minutes. It was also called insulin dependent because I think you're familiar with the fact that people with type 1 do not make insulin or do not make enough, and so you give insulin by injection. It's just a fairly small percentage of all of the diabetes that is type 1. And if people give themselves insulin approximately within what their body would have done, could it have, they do quite well. Although the average person with type 1 diabetes lives about 10 years less than someone in their same category, if you will, because it's challenging to do it perfectly well. And they can be quite free of complications if they're careful. What's causing it? For years we didn't know. Is it a virus that was going around for a while? We now know, folks, this is, I don't know where you might stand with this problem, but we now know it's caused by cow's milk. And if I had 10 minutes, I would describe for you the reaction in the body's reaction to insult, disease of various kinds. It's an autoimmune condition brought on by cow's milk, even in adults. Now, the adult has to have a certain genetic, I'd love to talk about this for half an hour, has to have a certain genetic anomaly or a certain change in the DNA that makes this possible. And when that's there, the protein that takes place, I'd love to take more time on this, but the point is that that little child got that genetic mutation, and most every young mother today knows that if they decide not to nurse or they can't and they're going to buy formula, they should never buy formula with cow's milk in it because of the risk of type 1 diabetes. Now, it's a fairly small percentage of children that have that genetic anomaly. Are you all with me in what I'm trying to describe? And up to this point, it's not been well understood what the genetic problem is, but it's very clear. Virtually every one of my physician friends in the lifestyle world agree with this. McDougall agrees with it. The fellow I put on the screen a couple of days ago agree with it, that it's being caused by cow's milk. I could go on for an hour about cow's milk. You know, why do we drink the milk from another species? Why don't we pay women to pump and buy? Why don't we drink human milk? Well, everybody understands that a baby eventually needs to stop drinking human milk. Is that right? I don't know why I'm getting sidetracked on this. In fact, the oldest girl on the left, when her firstborn, I don't know how many months old was he bit her one day. And she says, "That's enough for you, bub." You know. So eventually they have to be weaned, don't they? And the deal, folks, is milk is far too rich a food. Are you hearing me? And I was raised on a dairy. We didn't know any better. I drank 3 glasses of milk with every meal. Do you know what? This has been studied. 3 glasses of cow's milk with every meal predisposes you at a very high level for cancer. I was diagnosed 22 years ago with prostate cancer. Now, that's another topic I am going to deal with this week. I was told I had 5 years. I had surgery. I was told I had 5 years. I'm now 22 years down line, and they cannot find a cancer cell in my body. And every physician I've ever worked with, the urologists, we move once in a great while, and there's a new one, they all say, "You're not going to die from prostate cancer, Jim," because they know our lifestyle. And many of them are fairly well informed about that. It was called adult onset, or non-insulin dependent, because these people are making insulin, but because of these other problems, they can't control their sugar. And 95% of all the diabetes is type 2. In this country, 95% of it. And it doesn't matter how much insulin you give people, friends, you cannot completely control the blood sugar. So it's a real challenge. Virtually everybody with diabetes gets complications, but there's wonderfully good news. But these are 2 completely different diseases. By the way, a little side story. My wife and I have worked rather extensively with natives in this country, and mostly with the Navajo people. And we were doing a 6-day, all-day-long program in Monument Valley one time. There's about 100 of the native people there. High rate of disease. You probably know this among native peoples of diabetes. And then there's a whole clinic, 2 clinics there that do nothing but treat diabetes. And the nurse from one of those clinics came to me and she said, "I have a 5-year-old boy with type 2 diabetes." Later in the week, a physician came, and a nurse too, and said they were treating a 1-year-old baby with type 2 diabetes. So it's a heartache to see how those people have drifted off into a... In early days, folks, nobody was sick. They raised their own food in their gardens, and the Navajo people had a saying, I could never repeat it in their language. If you run every morning, you'll run when you're old. That was their little thing. And they did that. They go out and run because that's just what they were taught. Now, this is a very interesting story because everybody in this room has heard. Look out for the starch. That's the problem. Is that correct? Haven't you all heard that? It turns out it's a complete misinformation. Let me explain it. But the interesting thing was, clear back, I think it's 1978. I'll show you the date in a minute. This fellow is still alive. He's not a friend. I've listened to him lecture a number of times. You can still listen to him if you wanted to on YouTube, James Anderson. He fed people with diabetes, listen to this, a high-carb diet. And he found, this is published in 79, the research was done in 78. He found that he could get them off their insulin by feeding them a what? High-carb diet. What does the average American know about carbs? Bad. I'll try to make this clear, but that's bad information, friends. Anyway, 9 patients getting up to 20 units, completely off, and in 2 patients, 32 units, was able to take them off. And amazingly enough, look at heart disease, friends. They had an average 53-point drop in their cholesterol in about 2.5 weeks, just over 2 weeks, by putting them on what kind of a diet? High carb. Now, not the carbs that Americans buy. When you buy carbs in the store, it's usually they're full of fat and other junk. Am I right? So what we're really talking here, and most of you probably know this, I don't use the V words. In the industry that I'm in, we call it whole plant. You can call it vegetarian and vegan if you like, but one of the reasons I don't is you can be a junk food vegan. I mean, after all, aren't French fries and potato chips junk food? Are they vegan? Are they only from plants? Yeah. So the term that the professionals use is whole plant, which has some interesting meaning to it more than you might think of right at first. Now, let's see. This is an interesting question here. We didn't talk about volume, Dan. Do you think it would work? Why don't we just put my mic down there and see if you can hear my friend Dr. Ethelston talk. This may blow your mind, friends, but I will explain it in case it's a total shock to you.
Oil injures endothelial cells. Olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, sunflower.
Let's try it one more time here.
Oil injures endothelial cells.
One more time. Now that I know where to put it.
Oil injures endothelial cells. Olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, palm oil in a cracker, oil in bread, oil in a salad dressing.
The coconut oil miracle is that it's still on the market.
And so when we just hear little clips on the news, maybe on the internet, says olive oil's the way to go, we grab onto that. And unfortunately, it's bad information.
Everybody says, well, gosh, Dr. Ethelston, it's so hard. Aren't they going to have some of these places have oil? Yeah, all of them. When the waiter or the waitress comes to your table, you turn in your seat, take your glasses off, look them squarely in the eye. You must understand that I am deathly allergic to a single drop of any oil. Now, you get creative. You will lose weight. You will lose your high blood pressure. You will lose your diabetes. You will feel better. You will lose your risk for stroke. You will lose your risk for dementia. So there are side effects.
Now, Ethelston, how many of you know the name? If there was a leader in this world that I'm living in and talking about, it would be Ethelston. Written a couple of books, just a tremendously able physician, surgeon. The first research on reversing heart disease was done by a physician by the name of, at San Francisco, UC San Francisco, Dean Ornish. He showed, he had 24 men, double blind, not double blind, but part of it was blind. Some of them left on their regular lifestyle. I'm sorry. Some of them put on the American Heart Association diet for heart disease. The other half, these were chosen at random out of the 24 men with bad heart disease. The other half, he put them on the program that we're talking about. And he showed, and by the way, you could not get any money to research whether you could reverse plaque. Do you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this stuff that builds up? You couldn't get any money to see if you could reverse plaque because everybody knew you couldn't reverse it. Y'all with me? I have such respect for this fellow. He raised $3 million on his own and got these men, they were all males, and put half of them on the American Heart Association diet, which is the diet your cardiologist wants to put you on when he or she finds out you have plaque in your arteries. Y'all with me on this? And the other half, he put on a good lifestyle, if you will. Only plants, whole plant regimen. He had them exercise. He did some other things. And for the first time in the history of science, he showed that the amount, by doing angiograms, do you know what I'm talking about? He showed that the plaque had decreased significantly. in 1 year. That you think that's a long time, but the plaque takes a long time to build up generally, and it takes a long time to get it to go away. The people on the American Heart Association diet had an increase of 10% in their plaque. You say, what? It's amazing, friends, where we are. You can't really blame the physicians. I think the people to blame is the people you see in the mirror. Aren't we all kind of a little bit stuck in our ways and kind of stubborn and whatever? By the way, well, let me finish what Ethelston said will happen, and then I'll talk briefly about what he said. You'll lose weight. Your high blood pressure will go away. You'll feel better. Your diabetes will go away. You lose your risk for stroke. Lose your risk for dementia. I think there's one more, maybe not. Yeah, there isn't. So, and what was it? Could you hear what he said? Oil. The plant oils, folks, unlike animal fat, the plant oils, when they're the ones that are liquid at room temperature, oxidize as soon as you take them out of the plant. I don't care whether it's olive oil. You've all heard that olive oil is good for you. That is a lie. It's just a little less bad than some of the other oils. And this is not some crazy thing that Jim Brackett thought up, folks. I'm picking out the guy that's probably the foremost researcher in this question in the world. Are you all with me on this? Caldwell Ethelston. And he named oil in bread, oil in a cookie, oil wherever it's at is bad for you. You all with me on this? And the reason it's bad for you is at the moment that oil is taken out of the nut or out of the avocado or out of the olive or out of the almond or whatever, it starts to oxidize. Those oxidized fats are free radicals. You all know that term, don't you? What do you know about free radicals? Good or bad? Anything particular you know about them? They are carcinogens, friends. Listen to me carefully. Now, this is a whole other topic that I will get to this another night, so maybe I won't do it now. But Ethelston is saying to us, and all of the other people were physicians. In fact, this is from a film called Eating You Alive. Anybody watch that film by any chance? Eating You Alive. Kind of a cute little takeoff on words. You can eat yourself into what? Better health. Y'all, that's the idea. And Ethelston is one of a dozen, probably 15 or more physicians, all clear on this question. Very interesting film. Now, let me show you, some of you saw this a couple of days ago, but I'm going to go through it quickly. Let's let this horizontal line be time. Let's say 10 years. And let's let the vertical line be insulin. And let's let the yellow line be the normal level of insulin in your and my blood if we're just living normally. It's going to be up a little bit this hour and down that hour, but are y'all with me? Just kind of a normal level. Y'all with me on that idea? And for 75% of Americans, somewhere fairly early in their life, maybe, who knows, 15, 20, 25 or so, the amount of insulin their body is making starts to increase. It's increasing because the way they are living makes the body have to make more insulin to control their blood sugar. Nobody is measuring this. I don't know of any medical office that checks to see what your insulin level is. They'll check your sugar, and if it's elevated, they won't check your insulin. They will ask you to come back in a week or two or something and check it again and say, okay, we got to get you on some medication. Your blood sugar's out of control. You all understand what I'm talking about. But during this entire period, from, can you see my little pointer? Can you? From here to where I'm stopping for the moment, the blood sugar is normal, but the insulin level is what? Elevated, which turns out to be bad. In fact, we think this is the, and I shouldn't say think, this is so highly observed that it's very likely just absolutely the fact. This elevated level of insulin in your blood means it's an elevated level of insulin in your brain. Are you with me on that? We think this is the primary cause of dementia. Therefore, what are they calling this increased level of insulin? What are they calling it now? Type 3 diabetes. That is to say, they are calling Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. It may be that 75% of the people in this room are in this condition. And the thing that will change it or make you well from your diabetes is to go on a whole plant regimen, which the average person on the street thinks is absolutely crazy. Am I correct? You know who's absolutely crazy on the street? It's the other person. They're uninformed. Are y'all with me? They're uninformed. Now, eventually, the pancreatic cells which make insulin fatigue and actually can't make it as well and even die. But up to the point where the second white arrow is on your right hand, you understand that the blood sugar is still normal. Are you all with me on this? But now, the body cannot continue on that path, and it cannot keep the insulin level up. And at that point in time, unbeknownst to the person, the blood sugar starts to rise. And somewhere after that point, hopefully the physician learns that there's a problem and they try to start dealing with it. I think you know this, folks. There is no way to keep people from getting damage to their bodies once they have diabetes with medication. Should I repeat that sentence? Let me say it another way. Damage to the tissue continues to increase no matter what you do with people's medication to control their blood sugar. But the average person with diabetes believes that the physician is taking proper care of them and that they will be okay. But it is not correct. And any honest physician will say, oh yeah, you know, I can't control your blood sugar completely. I can help you, and so forth. All right. This is a very cool... Oh, by the way, I won't go back to that picture. When that person, where the insulin level starts to fall, is diagnosed to have high blood sugar, you know what the doctor says to them? You have insulin resistance. You've heard the term, have you not? I hate the term because they don't explain to the patient, but you could get over it very quickly. You could have your control back very quickly. They don't, and in fact, the physician, you understand this, folks? Do you know how much nutrition physicians are given in medical school? Now, it's beginning to change, but it's precious little. And I can't blame the physicians. Here's a story. I gotta be careful. My wife and I have conducted 6-day residential seminars for people with degenerative disease, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, etc. We started doing these about 50 years ago. We would rent a camp somewhere. I'd get a physician friend to join us, and we would have these people stay for 6 days, and we'd teach them how to get well. When I retired in 06, we bought 40 acres up near the Canadian border and built a lifestyle center. We have cottages I built there. People come and stay with us for a whole 6 days, and we did it on our property. And why am I telling you that story? I have forgotten. Why am I telling them that story, dear? Oh, she forgot too. Okay. In any case, I hate this term, insulin resistance, because it's really a poor description of the problem. And you can get over insulin resistance like in 24 hours. And I'm trying to say the physician's name that did this. It'll come to me in a minute. The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Who was he? Anyway, he produced this video. It's a very simplistic picture, and that all of those little white balls sticking up, and if you can kind of get the point, all the little white balls sticking down, you know what I'm talking about? You all with me? Are they blue on the screen? Okay, they're white on mine. All of these little white balls, you see what I'm drawing at, friends? See them? And they have little feet on them. See the two little feet? And see these little white balls? You all with me? You can't see my cursor. I'm going to waste your time for about 15 seconds and go make my cursor big, and I intended to do that before you came, and I apologize, but I don't think it'll take very long, so I can show you what I'm looking at. Make the pointer big, like that, and we're done. And go back here, like that. And do you see the little white balls I'm pointing at? Do you? Yes. That's the outside of the cell. This is highly magnified. It's a cell wall. Does that make sense? And the wall actually has two sides. You can't see it as well. So this is cellular membrane. And picture a circle and a ball. And the red things are what we call insulin receptors. I'd love to take a 2-hour side trip on this topic, but I will refrain. And the purpose of insulin receptors is to open a pathway for sugar to get from the blood into the cell. Follow that? Y'all with me? And so I'm going to play the video and start and stop it. I'm going to turn the volume off because I want to stop and start it and not have him talk. And here we go. Oh, I have to do this first and this. So he turned the cell in the picture. It's kind of a cartoonish thing, sideways. You see the little yellow dots, correct? Those are free fatty acids that should not be there. But guess why they are there? It's because of the way people are eating. Too much fat in their diet. And when the insulin comes along and fastens to the insulin receptor, like this, a chemical signal is sent to the interior of the cell to open those channels for sugar to move from the blood into the cell. The cell wall, folks, is a magnificent membrane. You could have a university textbook that thick just on the cell wall and its functions. And it is very particular about what it lets in or out. And this is the mechanism that gets sugar from the blood into the cell, which the cell needs. You're gonna think I'm crazy. I'll show you why I think I'll still have time before I quit. Sugar is perfect fuel for the cell. Did you hear me? It really is, and I'll tell you why in a sentence. When the little furnace in our cells, furnaces, when they burn sugar, you get three things. You get energy, you get carbon dioxide, which you just breathe out, and you get, guess what? What's that? You get carbon dioxide and water. When you burn carbohydrate, when you burn sugar, sugar is carbohydrate. Are you with me on that? When you burn carbohydrate, energy, carbon dioxide, which you breathe out, and what else? Water. And when you burn, there's only three things that supply calories: carbohydrate, fat, and protein. When you burn either fat or protein, you make ketones, which in spite of the fact that the keto diet is a rage, it's insanity, by the way, those ketones are poison in your body. Are you all with? How many kind of knew that? Let me see your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. You all know it now, correct? Those ketones are poisons. and a small amount your body can deal with. But your body is designed to burn carbohydrate. It's such a clean fuel. Got it? You're not nodding, everybody, but you're thinking about it, right? Oh, I'm not talking about refined carbohydrate. I hope you knew that. Neva said maybe you didn't. Maybe I didn't make it clear. Anyway, here we go. So there's the insulin. Y'all with me? Right there. Fastens to the receptor. And then a signal. Now, the cartoon shows it as a ball. It's actually a chemical signal. All right? And the signal says, open the sugar channels. But guess what blocks the signal? The fatty acids. And the signal cannot reach the interior of the cell. Remove them, and the sugar channels open up, and the sugar pours from the blood into the cell. Doing what for the blood sugar? Lowering it. And I'm so sorry to say this about your physician. He says, you've got insulin resistance. You better take some medications of various kinds. And of course, metformin is the big thing today, and it works a little bit. If you went on a whole plant regimen, you could get over insulin resistance in a day or two. Now, most of you are not there. I understand that. But if you will discipline yourself and decide to do it, there's 100 reasons, good reasons for it. I mentioned a story a couple of days ago. I'll just say this. We see this all the time. I could tell you stories, folks, forever on this, but a guy came to our program up there where we live near the Canadian border. Overweight, fasting blood sugar, 200 plus, close to 300 often, hypertension, neuropathy from his knees on down, couldn't feel anything. He came Sunday, like everybody does for our 6-day program. By Thursday afternoon, he walked into the classroom and he said, my neuropathy is completely gone. And I wish you all would have said, wow. Too astonished. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. It's amazing, friends. It works. My wife and I have been watching this for years. I have been a guest lecturer. I'm the only non-physician with 30 physicians that have done lectures all over the world on these topics. I'm very blessed to be with these guys and ladies. And in every group, we always see people within 48 hours, their neuropathy is getting better. Absolutely amazing. I'm sorry? Go ahead. I'm happy to take a comment or a question. Yeah. The problem, folks, is Americans are getting too many calories. You understand that, I know. But when they come from fat, they're especially dangerous. Let me give you an example of that. Let's take 3 ounces of bacon, chips, even worse, plain potato. It's crazy. People think potatoes are what? Fattening. Listen, it's not the potato, it's what they put in the crack that's the problem. You understand that? It's not the potatoes are perfect food. Listen, one of my major professors in biochemistry took a group of PhD candidates down to South America and studied a tribe that were getting 97% of their calories from sweet potatoes. In other words, from potatoes. Are you all with me on this? He thought that they could go down there and help these natives learn to do better. It's a very interesting story. After about 2 weeks, they packed up their bags and went home because these people were in perfectly good health. They spent most of the day out in the sun hoeing their sweet potatoes. And they got 97% of their calories from potatoes. Potatoes are wonderful food, friends. And there's ideas in our cookbook for what you can put on the potato if you'd like. 3 ounces of... Are you getting what I'm showing you, folks? When something comes from a plain plant, it's low in calories. There's only 4 categories of plants that are high in fat. Everything else in the whole billions of plants in the world are low in fat and just really, really good food for us. Broccoli. I should tell George, about that. Huh? Yeah, George Bush about that. I think it was his father, as you know, that didn't like broccoli. Do you get this point here, friends? This is amazing what's going on in our lives. Now, here is the furnace. The top is cut off that burns any one of those three things. What are they? Fats, carbohydrate, and protein for energy, right? And those furnaces can burn any of those. And the preferred thing is sugar. Not this kind of sugar, but not this kind of sugar, or this kind. Well, the banana's okay, but this kind of sugar. And this kind of sugar. Somebody said potatoes are starch. They are perfect food. What's the perfect fuel for cells? Say it. Starch, carbohydrate. Perfect fuel. Green beans, and so forth. All of these. You know how many, I don't like lentils very well. It's okay if you don't like some bean. You know how many varieties of legumes there are in the world? 16,000. And is it okay if you don't eat one of those ever? Say yes. It's all right. Okay. Now this is from our cookbook. That waffle that Americans normally make is a rich pastry. Eggs, white flour, oil, correct? We make it sometimes out of nothing but oatmeal, water, and salt. Now, when we opened a couple of restaurants, and Eva kind of spiced it up a little bit, not spice, but she added some nuts and something to make it and a little flaxseed to make it a little richer. But you can make it very simply, and if you have diabetes, you should use the simplest one. Oatmeal, water, and salt. We did that in a restaurant in Seattle for years. Then that's blueberry sauce. And we have a, if you will, healthy ice cream in our cookbook, which we served there. And you wouldn't mind having ice cream on berries on waffles every morning, would you? Okay. I'm going to pass this up because I'm over time. It just shows you that nuts are high in fat, which is fine. You wouldn't eat large amounts of nuts, maybe, but so high carb, low fat, low protein. You say to me, that's backwards. Actually, folks, protein is bad for you when you get too much. Too much protein is bad for your bones. It's bad for your kidneys. Do you know that that Americans are getting 10 times as much protein as they need? It's bad for them. It's crazy, friends, how uninformed people are. And you might say, I hope you're not saying about me, you don't know what you're talking about. I could walk 30 physicians through here, folks, who are experts in this field that I've learned a lot of this from, as well as I was in graduate school, like I told you, to learn all this kind of thing. So this is the way, what makes people well, and the only way you can get that, friends, is from plants. Plenty of these things. Carbohydrate burns clean and powerful. Fat and protein make chemicals that if in small amounts our bodies can handle it, but in higher amounts. I won't even read to this. This names some of the chemicals that are formed when your furnaces burn fat or protein, which are not good for us. Just quickly here, you may not know that big red thing is, hopefully you knew that it was the fuel tank, but it's actually got two tanks in it. One has hydrogen and one has oxygen. And the reason the hydrogen tank is twice as big as the oxygen tank. And by the way, folks, that's the fuel for the 3 engines that are at the bottom of the shuttle itself. There's these booster engines on the side, but the 3 engines that run the shuttle itself are using hydrogen and oxygen. And what do you suppose happens when you burn hydrogen in the presence of oxygen? You get H2O. You all know what that is, don't you? What's coming out of those engines, folks, at the bottom of the shuttle is water vapor. Is that cool? Say yes. Okay. Now, that's just to illustrate. Are the scientists going to pick the best fuel in the world per pound that they can get? Of course. And guess what it is? It's oxygen and hydrogen. And all you do is add carbon to that, and you have carbohydrates. You may not have known that, but there you go. That's carbohydrate. Gives you carbon dioxide, water, and, of course, energy. All right. I think I think we've done enough here. I think I've kept you over time. Let me just see if there's any other slides in here I'd like to take a minute on. And, oh yes, one last interesting thing. Here we go. Now let me say, friends, what we're suggesting you do is absolutely crazy, isn't it? I have friends, in fact, I was actually the boss. Some of you will know about this place called Weimar Institute. Back in 1978, when Jim Anderson did those studies, remember, on people with diabetes, a group of physician friends of mine, one of them was my college roommate, he became the board chairman. Another one of those was the medical director. They bought 460 acres from the state of California, which had been a sanitarium for tuberculosis, and they built that into a lifestyle program for degenerative diseases. And they've been running it now for, what is it, almost 40 years? 78 till now? That's 44 years, isn't it? And I was the boss actually there about 10 years ago for 2 years. I won't get into that story, but these people are all friends of mine. And they charge $6,500 for people to come there for 18 days and learn how to get well. They learn the very same thing at our program for 6 days for $650. And the reason I'm unabashedly telling you is we have stopped doing that program because my wife is getting older. Actually, since we probably have done 50 to 70 of those before I retired, but on our property since I retired, we have done 54 6-day programs on our property, and it's time to quit. But you can pay $6,500 and get an 18-day program at Weimar Institute, east of Sacramento, about 50 miles, for the mere fee of $7,000. What did I tell you we charge for 6 days? About $650. And like I say, I have been a guest lecturer with those physicians for 20 years. And then they asked me to be the vice president and run the place for a couple of years because the new owner couldn't be there for a while. Anyway, pardon me, dear? Yeah. So they pay $6,500. And when I was there for those 2 years, I went to every single graduation at the end of the 18 days. In almost every case, when they came on campus new, I was the vice president. I met with them and spoke with them and so forth. And you listen to their testimonies. I mean, those people are just glowing. They have gotten well, and they are on top of the world. They know why they've gotten well, and they're going to go home and do this. Would you like to guess what percentage of them stay on the program long term? 10%. After paying how much? $6,500. What's the deal? I'm telling you, folks, they knew why they got well. They're going to do it when they get home. I'll tell you why. It's so different. Who is so dumb that they would do this? But that's human nature, and our record isn't much better with the live-in or residential programs that we've done, but a little better. I suppose we're a little more able to keep in touch with people because we never take more than 20 people, and most of the time it's 8 or 10 people that have come to our program through the years. But it's so different, friends. I would like people that are sick, if you have one of these conditions, hypertension, diabetes, even heart disease. Now, folks, heart disease, the plaque of this lecture comes another evening. You can make it go away, but you have to be even stricter than I have described. Are you all with me? But it will go away. The studies are there that show. Ethelston himself and Ornish both have shown this. In any case, what to do? If there's any way you could just do this tomorrow, you should. The problem is if we start out, and it's not a problem, but maybe you start out just making one change at a time. I don't know, folks. The point is, if you will do this, if you're not well, you will get well. And what did Ethelston say you would avoid if you followed this program? Tell me, you'd lose your risk for diabetes, stroke, heart disease, hypertension, dementia. That's a big one, is it not? So hopefully, whatever you cogitate as you think over what I've presented, find a way, make a decision, find a way to fulfill your decision. So I'll be happy to take questions if any of you want to slip forward here. If you want a cookbook, one of Neva's books, one of our books. That picture. Oh, thank you, dear. Let me take 2 more minutes of your time. Here's a big family bag of potato chips. Has 1,000 calories. And let's say, where is the picture? This is the picture that I needed to start with. I apologize. Let's take an ear of corn and remove all the carb, all the protein, all the vitamins and minerals, all the fiber, all the phytochemicals. What is left of those kernels? Several of you said it accurately. Fat. And if you take 14 ears of corn and get the fat out of it, you'll get 1 tablespoon of oil. Somebody is saying, that will have about 100 calories, roughly. Different oils, slightly different amounts. So here's that potato that, let's say, has 200 calories. Let's make it into potato chips. And on the back of the bag, it will say there's 1,000 calories. And there's 1 potato that won't tell you that. And how many calories did I say was in that potato? 200 calories. So this bag of potato chips will have 1,200 calories. And by the way, oh, there it is. What do I need beside the potato to get my 1,000 calories? 8 tablespoons of oil. Are you all with me on that? Now let's take a look at this. 14 ears for each tablespoon. You with me so far? 112 ears of corn. Now listen. And I know you've never done this, but there's been a time in my life when I had a whole bag all by myself. A couple of people are nodding. Yeah, right. You need that 8 tablespoons of oil when you eat 112 ears of corn. Got it? Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow night. Oh, dear, Neva has one more thing I'm supposed to say. Yeah, we make potato chips. Instead of putting oil on them, we bake them in an air fryer. And they're quite delightful. Takes a lot of work. All you have to do is put some money down and take a bag home. But anyway, thank you for coming. Please forgive me for going past. I usually do that. No, that's all right. And now there's another comment from one of the sponsors, so I should not. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that Roy Swank was the doctor that treated Joe's cousin for MS, and she followed his diet strictly and had a very good life.
Yes.
So Roy Swank was a fantastic.
What a contribution he made to mankind. But it turns out that many other people have since then followed this plan, and it's you talk to the folks that are most informed on this, and they will agree with what I said here this evening. Good night. See you tomorrow night.
Do we know what the next meeting theme is?
It's on the bulletin, and is coronary artery disease. Fascinating topic. Please come back with your neighbors. Okay. Good night.